7.5 trillion rubles in oil and gas revenue for the first 8 months of 2024. This thread highlights the failures of Russian oil sanctions and the price cap, and the example of a Latvian national who is currently circumventing oil trade sanctions for Russia, significantly increasing Russia's revenue to fund the genocide in Ukraine. Reuters reports that Russia's oil and gas revenues surged by 41% in the first half of 2024. Putin is successfully circumventing the democratic world's price cap on Russian oil using a shadow fleet of tankers to work around international sanctions. The first 8 months of oil and gas sales for Russia is comparable to the level of revenue from 2022. The 7.5 trillion rubles figure is according to the Russian Ministry of Finance in its latest results publication. Of course, one needs to treat any data released from Putin's regime with skepticism. He declared economic and financial data in Russia a state secret and has since authorized opaque and manipulated results to bolster the image of Russia, designed to give the Russian people and the rest of the world the impression that the Russian economy is strong, while hiding specific trade and income data that would indicate otherwise. What is likely, though, is there is an increase in revenue from fossil fuels for Russia, despite the sanctions and price caps imposed by the European Union, the G7 and others. Another conclusion that one can make is around increasing revenues with inflation in Russia. The higher the inflation, the more expensive things get, the more the regime makes on taxes such as VAT. It is estimated that half of Russia's oil and gas revenue funds the war in Ukraine for Putin. Limiting the revenue on oil, Russian seaborne oil, but EU-owned and registered ships, is subject to a cap of $60 per barrel for crude oil and $100 for refined. The cost price for Russia crude, excluding state extraction taxes and transportation, is estimated at sub $15 per barrel. There are two fundamental flaws in both sanctions and the price cap approach by the EU and G7. First, the price cap allows a significant level of profit for Russia in every barrel. Second, the price cap only applies to oil shipped on EU-owned or registered vessels. Russia bypasses this by expanding the size of its shadow fleet, which can ship oil well over the price cap, increasing its revenues per barrel. The EU and G7 have allowed Greek shipping magnates to sell their aging tankers to Russia to circumvent sanctions, making a few shipping owners incredibly rich, while giving Putin what he needs to circumvent sanctions. This pressure on carriers and insurers was the cornerstone of the price ceiling strategy. When faced with the problem of regulating transactions between Russian oil sellers and buyers in countries like China or India, the G7 group of economically advanced democracies, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States, proposed leveraging the transport and insurance sector, which is dominated by companies heavily dependent on Western regulatory systems. The assumption was that these companies, fearful of facing legal consequences in the Western markets where they earn much of their revenue, would refuse to handle Russian oil sold above the ceiling. Russia's response was straightforward. They simply transferred tankers bought from legitimate carriers to grey and black companies registered in opaque jurisdictions. These shell companies operate outside the realm of Western regulatory pressure as they do not participate in the open market. Their sole purpose is to transport Russian oil while evading sanctions. Insurance for these shipments isn't provided by reputable global firms, but by dubious entities. The EU and G7 have failed to enforce the price caps. One example of this is allowing the EU to trade in Russian oil above the price cap. One of the largest buyers of Russian oil above the price cap is Latvian National Aleksejs Haļavins, who has 3 Dubai-based businesses conducting this trade. Black Pearl Energy Trading LLC, which Haļavins owns and runs, along with affiliate companies OGC Shipping LLC and Conmar Maritime. In 2023, Black Pearl and Haļavins bought approximately 38 million barrels of Russian oil from Surgutneftegaz at an average price of $82 per barrel, which is $22 per barrel above the price cap. In the first 5 months of 2024, Black Pearl Energy Trading bought over 20.6 million barrels for an average price of $83.7 per barrel, $23.7 per barrel over the price cap. Latvian citizen Aleksejs Haļavins, as 2 entities affiliated with the businessman, are known to have purchased oil from Russian oil company Surgutneftegaz at a price above the cap, bringing the Russian corporation an additional $1.4 billion. Other companies linked with Haļavins operated tankers carrying oil from Russia to India and China. Notably, Israel has accused one of these tankers of supplying oil to Lebanon's Hezbollah and Iran's Quds Force. The insider traced Haļavins's connection to Russian national Mikhail Silantiev, the former head of Promserio Import, a state-owned company sanctioned on 2 counts, for supplying fuel to Crimea and for supplying oil to Syria. As a result, Surgutneftegaz alone received roughly $1.4 billion more in revenue than it would have by selling its oil at the price cap rate. The total yearly additional revenue to the Russian budget from oil sales bypassing the cap is estimated at $7 to $11 billion, a significant boost to the Russian war machine. These figures were published by The Insider. The UK's official estimate suggests that Putin's shadow fleet is made up of approximately 600 ships that transport an average of 1.7 million barrels of oil per day. The Insider connected Haļavins to companies owning and operating tankers that deliver Russian oil to Indian and Chinese ports. In a 2022 interview for Young Ship Cyprus, Haļavins presented himself as the general manager of Sparta Ship Management and chair of the board of directors and ultimate beneficial owner of the OGC Group. On LinkedIn, he was actively hiring commercial fleet operators in Dubai, providing his SpartaShipManagement.com email for communication. Sparta Ship Management is registered in Cyprus at the same address as Lagos Marine Limited. Both companies are now managed and formally owned by the same Greek national. Lagos Marine also shares the address with a host of shell companies that own the tankers Clyde Noble, Sega Violet, and Caroline Bazengi, according to the International Maritime Organization, as follows from records on marinetraffic.com. These vessels regularly navigate between the Russian ports of Primorsk, Ust-Luga and Kozmino, and ports in India and China. According to customs documents, the same routes were used to move oil sold to Dubai-based companies linked to Haļavins. Incidentally, Israel accuses one of Lagos Marine's tankers, the Fuga Blue Marine, of transporting Iranian oil for the Quds Force and Hezbollah, as follows from a document signed by Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. On his LinkedIn profile, Haļavins identifies himself as the beneficiary and CEO of the Conrad Management Company. The insider has obtained several residency permits issued in the UAE to employees of the Russian state-owned company Promserio Import. In some cases, Conrad Management Company is listed as the sponsor for these individuals' stays in the UAE. FGUP Promserio Import is a company under the jurisdiction of the Russian Ministry of Energy that handles maritime shipments of oil and petroleum products. This company is no stranger to sanctions violations.
Has this content been useful to you? Would you like to see more research and translation content from Beefeater Fella? If you do, and you want to stay up to date with my work, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel now. It takes just a few seconds and it's free. This is really important. Your support and recommendations can make a big difference to the channel.
Even before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Promserio Import was sanctioned by Kiev for supplying fuel to Crimea. And in 2018, the firm was sanctioned by the US for its role in facilitating Iranian oil deliveries to Syria, bypassing restrictions imposed by Washington. At present, details about Promserio Import's management are concealed in the Russian registry. Mikhail Silantiev previously held the position of the company's acting CEO. Border crossing records indicate that Silantiev has made numerous trips between Russia and the UAE in recent months. If this oil was shipped on EU, G7 or Norway-owned vessels, that would be an outright breach of the sanctions. However, if this oil was shipped by vessels in the Russian shadow fleet, it would not. The obvious gaps in regulatory enforcement suggest that these authorities are failing to utilize tools readily available to investigative journalists, to say nothing of the more advanced financial intelligence methods that state services have at their disposal. Ships sold to Russia by Western shipping companies for massively overvalued amounts are almost all aging vessels. 390 of them are known to be over 16 to 20 years old. The ships represent a danger to maritime and ecological safety. They are poorly maintained and improperly maintained. So, using them to ship Russia crude oil by the Latvian trader exposes the world to a risk of an oil pollution catastrophe. Greenpeace have advised that a disaster from a shadow fleet vessel in the Baltics is just a matter of time. Aside from that, the fact that a Latvian trader is profiting off Russian oil is very concerning. Will the Latvian Aleksejs Haļavins be traceable when that happens, and will he fund the cleanup? A call for action. Attention, the Latvian government and Ursula von der Leyen. The price cap needs to be immediately lowered to $30 a barrel. No more pointless discussions and debates, just do it. Aleksejs Haļavins, the Latvian trader, that has emerged as a key player in the ongoing evasion of international sanctions against Russia, particularly in the oil sector. As these sanctions tighten in response to Russia's war in Ukraine, new avenues for circumventing these measures have emerged, allowing Russian oil to continue flowing onto the global market. Haļavins's actions raise critical questions about the effectiveness of sanctions and the integrity of global trade practices. Current Western legal frameworks have mechanisms in place for prosecuting citizens of democratic countries who assist in evading trade embargoes and sanctions. For instance, Article 84 of the Latvian Criminal Code establishes criminal liability for circumventing sanctions imposed by Latvia or international organizations. Furthermore, Article 4 extends this responsibility to Latvian citizens, even if the offence is committed outside the country. This is a call for the arrest and prosecution of the Latvian, and a call for closing the shipping lanes in the Baltics and ships transiting from places such as St. Petersburg in Russia. There is a legal clause in the International Convention relating to intervention on the high seas in the cases of oil pollution casualties, which allows countries to prevent, mitigate or eliminate grave and imminent danger to their coastline or related interests from pollution or threat of pollution of the sea by oil following upon a maritime casualty or acts related to such a casualty. In other words, a country can prohibit a vessel from entering its waters if it presents the apparent threat of an oil spill. Sanctions, penalties and enforcement for any vessel sales to the shadow fleet and any shipping companies who deal with Russian crude, refined or other products. Also tax the sale of the vessels to recoup billions made in profits by a select few shipping magnates. Without action to end the activities of the shadow fleet, not only will the Kremlin's coffers continue to swell, but the risk of oil spill disasters due to poorly maintained tankers and cost-cutting measures on crews and upkeep will also increase. This is also a call for the UK, EU, G7 and Norway to start sanctioning oil refiners, who, unlike carriers, cannot operate entirely in the shadows. They must be sanctioned for accepting Russian crude, with no exceptions are price or otherwise. The traditional argument for allowing Russian oil trade to continue has always been around the fear of causing the price of oil to rise when taking out 10% of world volumes. This argument does not stack up. The majority of Russia's oil and gas is sold to China and India. The impact to the world markets would be negligible. The argument around timing and the US elections and oil price rises is also historical and asinine. Saudi Arabia have this week indicated to the FT that they are abandoning the voluntary cut in outputs which they and Putin agreed in OPEC+. Since the Western embargo was imposed on Russian oil, Dubai, which does not apply any sanctions on Moscow, has become a new source of rich pickings for traders who want to continue doing business with Russia on the quiet. Dozens of companies which operated from Geneva before the war in Ukraine have beefed up their presence or set up new entities in Dubai. It is time to end the supply of oil and gas from Russia in the West. We are funding the genocide of Ukraine.